Dr. Marcus Hale slammed the personnel file onto the nursing station counter so hard that the coffee cups rattled. "Who authorized this hire?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the noise of the ER like a blade. He didn't wait for an answer. He pointed at Ava Lane, the new girl, the quiet one, standing at the edge of the floor with her clipboard clutched to her chest, and said it loud enough for everyone to hear, You don't belong here. Get out of my trauma bay before you get someone killed." Ava didn't move. She didn't flinch. She just looked at him with those steady gray eyes, and something in that stillness made Dr. Hale's jaw tighten. He had no idea what he was looking at. None of them did. If you've been watching this channel, you already know the stories we tell here hit different. Subscribe right now, hit that bell, and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go. The emergency department at St. Mercy Hospital never truly slept. It breathed heaving and rattling with the weight of human suffering, the click of monitors, the rolling wheels of gurneys, the overlapping voices of residents calling out numbers, vitals, medication, names like prayers. It was a machine, a brutal, necessary machine, and every person inside it had a role, a rank, and a carefully maintained understanding of where they stood. Ava Lane understood exactly where they thought she stood. She had been at St. Mercy for 6 days. 6 days of taking vitals, 6 days of holding hands, refilling water pitchers, checking IV lines, and absorbing the quiet condescension of people who believed that a woman who moved too carefully, who spoke too softly, who seemed too composed for the chaos around her, must not be built for this kind of work. Dr. Hale had made his opinion known on day one. The charge nurse Sandra Briggs had reinforced it every shift since. Even the residents, young men and women, who were themselves still learning, treated Ava like someone's well-meaning but misplaced volunteer. She let them. It wasn't patience exactly. It wasn't even strategy. It was something she had learned a long time ago in a different kind of theater, under a different kind of pressure. You do not announce yourself. You assess. You watch. You learn the terrain. You identify the weak points and the pressure valves, and you wait, not because you are afraid, but because the right moment matters more than the loudest moment. Ava Lane had learned that lesson in places most people would never visit in their worst nightmares. But on this floor on this morning, she was just the new nurse, the quiet one, the one Dr. Hale had already decided wasn't worth his time. She was checking on a patient in Bay 4, an older gentleman named Mr. Delgado, 73, admitted the night before for chest tightness that turned out to be acid reflux and anxiety when Sandra appeared at the curtain, clipboard in hand, reading, glasses perched at the end of her nose, like a school teacher who had already graded you and found you wanting. "Lane," Sandra said, not looking up. "Dr. Hale wants the triage log for the overnight shift cross-referenced with pharmacy intake reports. Do you know how to pull those?" "Yes," Ava said. Sandra finally looked up. "Have you done it before?" "Yes." Sandra studied her for a moment as if searching for the lie in that single syllable. She didn't find one because there wasn't one. She made a small sound, not quite a hum, not quite a sigh, and looked back at her clipboard. "Fine, have it on his desk by 9. Mr. Delgado watched Sandra leave, then turned his eyes to Ava with the conspiratorial warmth of a man who had survived long enough to find other people's politics quietly amusing. "She does that to everyone," he said. "Don't take it personal." "I don't," Ava said, and she adjusted his blanket without being asked. "You're new, though. How long have you been doing this?" Ava considered the question. There were several honest answers depending on how you define this. If you meant nursing registered and licensed working in a hospital with a badge clipped to her scrubs, then 6 days. If you meant keeping people alive under circumstances that defied reasonable expectation, then it was closer to 8 years, and it had looked nothing like this. "Long enough," she said. Mr. Delgado nodded like that was the wisest answer he'd heard all week. "You've got steady hands. I noticed that yesterday when you changed my IV. Most of the young ones are a little shaky. You're not." "Steady hands are important," Ava said. "Where'd you learn? Before this, I mean." She smiled, quiet, practiced the particular kind of smile that answered without answering. "Around," she said, and patted his hand once and moved to the door. She had almost made it to the nursing station when the radio crackled. It was the security desk at the front entrance, a young officer named Cam who worked the early morning shift and who Ava had silently cataloged on day one as someone who was good at his job but not prepared for anything outside the ordinary parameters of hospital security. His voice on the radio had a specific quality to it now. Not Panic Cam was too trained for that, but something adjacent to it. Something that said the situation had escalated past the point where his training had clean answers. We've got a situation at the main entrance. I need backup. Now. The trauma floor paused. Just for a second, the particular animal pause of a group of people whose bodies have registered a threat before their minds have consciously processed it. Then the noise resumed, but differently. Tighter, more urgent. Sandra looked up from her station. Two residents exchanged a glance. Dr. Hale, who had been reviewing charts at the far end of the floor, straightened and looked toward the entrance corridor. Ava set down her water pitcher and turned. The automatic doors at the end of the corridor blew open. Not slid, not opened. Blew as though the force behind them was something the mechanism hadn't been designed to accommodate. And then he was there. The man who walked through those doors was not simply large. Large was a word that applied to football players and construction workers and men who lifted heavy things for a living. This man existed in a different category. He stood somewhere north of 6.5 feet, his shoulders broad enough that he instinctively turned sideways to clear the doorframe, before remembering he didn't need to. His arms were covered in ink, dark, intricate patterns that ran from his knuckles up, past the sleeves of his shirt, which was torn at one shoulder and stained with something that might have been blood. His face was not the face of a man who had come here for help. It was the face of a man who had come here for answers and who was not going to accept the answer that it was going to take a few minutes to process his paperwork. His eyes swept the room with the particular intensity of someone who had already decided that every obstacle between him and his destination was something to be moved. "Where is she?" he said. His voice was not a shout exactly. It was something worse. The controlled thunder of a man who had been holding a scream inside for hours and was now allowing just enough of it out to make his intentions perfectly clear. "Where is she? Someone tell me where she is right now." The ER floor responded the way civilian spaces always responded to the sudden introduction of uncontrolled violence with fragmentation. People moved backward without making a conscious decision to do so. A nurse in the back of the floor grabbed her phone. A resident pressed himself flat against a wall. Someone dropped something made of plastic and it clattered against the tile with a sound that seemed unnaturally loud. Cam, to his credit, stepped forward. He was younger than the giant by at least a decade and shorter by at least a foot, but he stepped forward. "Sir, I need you to stop, sir. You cannot be in here like this, sir." The giant didn't even look at him. He reached out with one hand almost casually, the way you might brush aside a curtain, and Cam went sideways into the wall with a grunt that told everyone watching that the air had gone out of him. He didn't fall, but he didn't advance again either. He stood against the wall, one hand braced on it, trying to remember how breathing worked. "Where is she?" The giant's voice was climbing now. He moved down the corridor, and people moved with him, not toward him, away from him, creating a wake of backward moving bodies and wide eyes. "I was told she was brought here. Someone talk to me. Right now. Where is my sister?" Sandra appeared from behind the nursing station because Sandra was the kind of person who responded to chaos by becoming more rigid rather than less. And she said in her most authoritative charged nurse voice, "Sir, you need to calm down immediately. This is a medical facility, and you are endangering." He turned toward her, and Sandra stopped talking, not because she decided to, because her body made the decision for her the same way your hand pulls back from an open flame before your brain has finished processing the fact that it's hot. Dr. Hale at the far end of the floor called out, "Someone get security in here. Get them in here right now." Two more security officers were already coming down the corridor, moving fast, hands up in the way that people are trained to approach unpredictable situations when they want to de-escalate, but are also acutely aware that de-escalation might not be on the table. The giant saw them, his jaw set, his shoulders squared, and something in his body language shifted from desperate to dangerous. Ava Lane walked out from behind the nursing station and stood in the corridor. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't announced herself. She simply stopped approximately 10 feet from the giant in the middle of the hallway and stood there with her arms at her sides and her weight evenly distributed and her eyes completely steady on his face. The giant looked at her. She looked back. "Her name," Ava said, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet, "is probably in our system. If you tell me who she is, I can find her. That's what you want, right? You want to find her." The giant stared at her. Something flickered in his face, not softness, not yet, but the hairline fracture that appears in a wall right before it decides whether to hold or give. She was brought in by ambulance, he said. His voice was rough. 40 minutes ago. They wouldn't tell me anything at the door. They just told me to wait. I waited. Nobody came. I understand, Ava said. What's her name? Maya Driscoll. Ava didn't look away from him. She spoke sideways toward the nursing station. Sandra, can you pull a Maya Driscoll incoming in the last hour? There was a beat. Sandra, who was not accustomed to taking directions from the newest and lowest ranking member of her staff, especially in the middle of an active crisis, said nothing for a moment. Then she moved to the computer. The giant took a step forward. What happened to her? Nobody will tell me what happened to her. We're going to find out together, Ava said, but I need you to stay here with me for a minute. Can you do that? He stopped. His hands were clenched at his sides, enormous scarred hands that could have done serious damage to anything they contacted. But they were still. He was looking at Ava the way people look at things they don't quite understand, when understanding feels more important than anything else. Who are you? He said. My name is Ava. I'm a nurse here. He looked at her for a long moment. You're not scared of me. It wasn't a question. It was an observation, confused, slightly raw, as though he'd said something he hadn't intended to say out loud. No, Ava said simply. Another beat. Then he said lower, everyone is scared of me. I'm not, she said again. And right now that's useful because I need you to work with me instead of against me. Your sister needs you thinking clearly. Can you do that? Something broke open in his face. Not violently, the opposite of violently. The way a fist opens into a hand. He exhaled a long, ragged sound that contained everything he'd been carrying since the moment the phone had rung and someone had told him Maya was hurt. His eyes went red at the corners. His chin dipped. I don't know what happened to her, he said. I got a call and they said she was in an ambulance and I just drove. I drove. And when I got here, they wouldn't let me in and I couldn't. I know, Ava said. I know, come here. She guided him, this enormous, terrifying, grieving man, to the row of chairs against the wall, and she stood next to him while Sandra pulled the intake records, and she kept her hand on his forearm, and she said quietly, Tell me about Maya. How old is she? He looked at her hand on his arm. He didn't pull away. 24, he said. She's my little sister. She's a good person. He stopped. His jaw worked. She didn't deserve whatever happened to her. No, Ava said, she didn't. Sandra appeared. Her voice when she spoke had lost some of its starch. Maya Driscoll, 24. She's in Trauma Bay 2. Dr. Hale is with her. She paused. She was brought in with chemical burns and signs of physical trauma. Her status is, I need to see her, the giant said. He was already half standing. In a minute, Ava said, and her voice was calm, but it had a quality to it and now a particular quiet authority that made him sit back down without fully understanding why. If you walk in there right now while they're working on her, you're going to make their job harder. You're going to make it harder for them to help her. You understand that, right? He looked at her. His eyes were bright. How long? As soon as I know something, I will tell you, I promise. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once slowly, like it cost him something. Dr. Hale was coming down the corridor now, moving fast, his expression tight with the particular controlled anger of a man whose domain had just been disrupted. He took in the scene, the giant sitting in the chairs, Ava standing beside him, the security officers hovering in the background, and his eyes went to Ava with an expression that was not gratitude. Lane, he said low and sharp. A word. She moved toward him. He turned slightly so his voice wouldn't carry back to the giant and said, What in the world do you think you're doing? De-escalating, she said. That is not your that is security's job. That man assaulted a security officer and you walked up to him like someone who could actually reach him, Ava said. Yes, Hale's jaw tightened. You don't have the authority. The alternative was watching him go through 3 more people to get to that trauma bay, Ava said, which would have put your patient at risk and your staff at risk. I made a call. You don't make calls here, Hale said. You're a first-week nurse. You check vitals. You do what you're told. Ava met his gaze without blinking. Understood, she said. It was the same word, the same measured, quiet tone. But something in the delivery of it, something in the absolute stillness behind her eyes made Hale pause for half a second, the way you pause when you reach for something you expected to give way, and it doesn't. He recovered quickly because Dr. Marcus Hale had not gotten where he was by letting pauses show. "Get back to your station," he said. "I'll handle Mr. Driscoll." He turned and walked back toward the trauma bay. Ava watched him go. Behind her from the chairs, the giant's voice came quietly. "Driscoll. My name is Driscoll. Nolan." She looked back at him. He was watching her. "I heard what he said to you," Nolan said. "I've got ears. He talked to you like you were nothing." "It's fine," Ava said. "It's not," he said. He looked at his hands. "I've had people talk to me like I'm nothing my whole life. Different reason. Same feeling." He was quiet for a moment. "You stood in front of me in that hallway. Most people don't do that." "Most people don't have to," Ava said. He looked up at her. "What does that mean?" She said nothing for a moment. Then, "It means I've been in situations that were more dangerous than this one. It changes your relationship with fear." Nolan studied her as a small blonde woman in scrubs with her lanyard and her badge and her entirely ordinary appearance, and there was something working behind his eyes that was more complex than curiosity. "More dangerous how?" "That's a longer story," Ava said. "And right now your sister is more important." He nodded, looked away, then quietly. "She was at work. She's a lab tech. She said there was an accident at the facility she works at, but the burns weren't right. I've seen accidental burns. These were—" He stopped. His voice had gone rough. "They hurt her on purpose. I know they did." Ava was very still. "What kind of facility?" "Chemical processing. Industrial. She's worked there 3 years, never had a problem. Then last month she started talking about, she said she'd seen something she wasn't supposed to see. She was scared. I told her to quit. She said she couldn't prove anything yet." His hands had closed again into fists, but it was different now. Not rage, but grief, the kind that has no clean outlet. "I should have made her quit." Ava absorbed this. Something was moving in the back of her mind. Not alarm, not yet, but the particular sharpening of attention that precedes alarm. The way certain patterns, once you've been trained to see them, announce themselves in the peripheral vision of your understanding before you've consciously focused on them. "When you spoke to whoever called you," she said carefully, "did they tell you anything about what chemicals she was exposed to?" Nolan shook his head. "They said they didn't know. That's what they said. I don't believe them." Down the corridor in Trauma Bay, an alarm began to sound. Ava turned. She was already moving before the sound had fully registered, and she was through the double doors of the Trauma Bay before the second resident had looked up from his chart. What she walked into was a trauma team in controlled crisis control because they were professionals. And professionals don't break but crisis because something had changed in the patient's presentation, and the working theory that had guided their treatment for the last 20 minutes had just stopped being right. Maya Driscoll lay on the gurney, her arms bandaged from wrist to elbow, her face ashen. She was 24 years old, and she looked younger the way people sometimes look very young when they are very afraid or very far from well. Her breathing was labored in a way that wasn't consistent with the burns alone. Her hands were trembling with a fine, rapid rhythm that the resident beside her was cataloging as shock, which was what the presentation looked like on the surface. It wasn't shock. Ava knew this the moment she stepped through the door, and she knew it because of something she hadn't been able to articulate in any nursing program, but that she had learned in a tent in a country she was not supposed to talk about, when a man who was supposedly stabilized had begun to tremor, exactly like this 18 minutes before his organs gave out. The smell hit her next. It was faint. The hospital smell was aggressive enough to mask almost anything, but it was there. A metallic sweetness. Thin and wrong. "What's her tox screen showing?" Ava said. Dr. Hale looked at her. The look was a wall-solid, immediate, unapologetic. "You're not supposed to be in here, Lane." "What's her tox screen showing?" she said again. "Lane, her tremor is not neurogenic shock," Ava said. She was already at the side of the gurney looking at Maya Driscoll's eyes without touching anything, without overstepping the physical boundaries of her role, but with the absolute focus of someone who has looked at dying people before and knows what the gradations of it feel like. The rhythm is too regular, it's too bilateral, and there's an odor in here that's not consistent with the burns or with this environment. There is no odor, Hale said flatly. What you're smelling is metallic and sweet, Ava said, faint, coming from her respiration. The resident, a young man named Torres who was in his second year and who had been quiet through all of this, looked up from Maya's arm and said with the careful uncertainty of someone who is not sure if they're allowed to confirm what they're thinking. I noticed it too. Hale turned to him sharply. Torres looked at his chart. She was exposed to an unknown substance at an industrial facility, Ava said. She has a pattern of exposure that her brother describes as deliberate. Her symptoms are progressing despite standard burn protocol. Her tox screen is not your department, Hale said. His voice had dropped into the register that doctors use when they want to convey that the conversation is over. Get out of my trauma bay, now. Ava looked at Maya Driscoll. Maya's eyes were open, glassy, frightened in the distant way of someone who is not quite all the way in their body anymore. Her fingers were still tremoring. Her lips were slightly blue at the edges, the kind of blue that was easy to attribute to shock and cold and the aggregate distress of an injured body. It was not that. Ava was certain it was not that. She's been poisoned, Ava said. Not loudly, not dramatically. The flat, certain way you say something when you have been in enough situations where being wrong means someone dies, and you have developed over years of that particular education and understanding of the difference between what you suspect and what you know. The burns are the cover story. Whatever they used on her is systemic, and it's in her bloodstream, and the protocol you're running right now is not going to catch it. The room went silent. Dr. Hale stared at her for a long electric moment. Then Maya Driscoll's monitor screamed. Not the gradual escalation of a worsening situation. The sudden vertical spike of a body that has crossed a threshold. Her oxygen saturation dropped 12 points in 4 seconds. Her heart rate spiked. The resident grabbed the crash cart. Hale spun toward the monitor, and the practiced language of medical emergency filled the bay numbers, medications instructions, the controlled chaos of people who know what to do but are also recalibrating at speed against a situation that is not matching their model. In the middle of it, Ava said clearly and evenly, chelation, she needs chelation therapy. It's a heavy metal compound. That's what's in her bloodstream. That's why she's crashing. Hale was at the monitor. His eyes flicked to Ava, just for a moment. The odor, Ava said. The bilateral tremor. The pattern of progression. The timing. It's consistent with thallium or a similar compound. Standard tox panels don't catch it unless you know to run the specific test. Torres said quietly. She's right about the panel. Standard tox wouldn't. Run the test, Hale said. It came out low and fast, the way commands come out when someone has made a decision and does not want to spend time examining the fact that the decision runs counter to their previous position. Torres, run the extended metals panel, now. Torres moved. Ava moved with him because no one told her not to, and because the room had shifted into a different mode, the mode where rank mattered less than accuracy, where the hierarchy was temporarily subordinated to the immediate absolute priority of keeping this woman alive. Nolan Driscoll was in the hallway outside the trauma bay, and he was not sitting in the chairs anymore. He was standing at the door, not crossing the threshold, respecting the line that Ava had drawn, but standing as close to it as he could, his enormous frame rigid with the effort of waiting when everything inside him was screaming to do something. He could hear the alarms. He could hear the voices. He could not see his sister. He pressed one hand flat against the wall and breathed. Inside, Ava Lane stood beside the gurney of a woman she had met 11 minutes ago, and she did not look afraid. She did not look uncertain. She looked like someone who had found after 6 days of taking vitals and refilling water pitchers and absorbing the quiet condescension of people who had no idea who she was, the exact situation she had been built for. The extended panel would confirm what she already knew. Maya Driscoll was still alive. For now, that was enough. The extended metals panel took 11 minutes to come back. 11 minutes is not a long time in most contexts. It is a very long time when the person you are waiting on is lying on a gurney with her oxygen saturation dropping and her fingers tremoring and her lips doing that thing at the edges that Ava had seen before and did not want to see again. Torres ran it. He ran it fast with the focused urgency of a man who had quietly decided somewhere in the last 4 minutes that the new nurse might know something the rest of them didn't, and that the cost of being wrong about that was too high to absorb. Ava stayed close to the gurney. Not hovering, not obtrusive, just present the way she had learned to be present in situations where her being there mattered and her being visible might complicate things. She watched Maya Driscoll's face. She watched the monitors. She counted the rhythm of Maya's breathing against the rhythm of the tremors in her hands and ran the numbers in the back of her mind the way she had been trained to run them in conditions that made this hospital look like a controlled experiment. Dr. Hale stood at the foot of the bed. He was not looking at Maya. He was looking at the door the way men look at doors when they are reassessing something and don't want anyone to see the reassessment happening. The room was quiet in the particular way that trauma bays go quiet when the chaos has passed its first peak and everyone is waiting to find out whether the intervention they just made was enough or whether there is a second peak coming that is going to be worse than the first. Nolan Driscoll was still at the door. Ava could see him in her peripheral vision, his massive silhouette pressed to the edge of the frame, not crossing the threshold, watching his sister with the expression of a man who has been told to stay back and is holding himself to that promise through sheer force of will and nothing else. When Torres came back through the door, he was moving fast enough that his chart slapped against his thigh. He crossed to Hale. He said nothing out loud, just held the results toward the doctor, and his face said everything the results contained. Before Hale had time to read a word, Hale took the paper. Read it. His jaw shifted a small, almost imperceptible movement, the kind that only registers if you're watching for it. Ava was watching for it. He looked up, across the gurney, at Ava. Thallium sulfate, he said. His voice was flat, controlled. Elevated serum concentration consistent with acute poisoning. The resident near the crash cart exhaled audibly. Torres said, "She would have been dead in another hour without—" "Start chelation," Hale said, cutting him off. "Prussian Blue Protocol. Get toxicology on the phone. Now I want a specialist down here in 20 minutes. He paused. "And get her stabilized before anyone lets that man in the hallway through that door." Torres moved. The other resident moved. The room shifted back into the gear of people who now knew what they were dealing with and had a path forward which was an entirely different energy than the gear of people who were guessing. Hale walked around the foot of the gurney. He stopped in front of Ava. He was a tall man, broad through the shoulders with the kind of face that had learned a long time ago to project authority as a reflex. He used it now the way he always used it, as a first response, a default setting, the position he returned to when he wasn't sure what else to do. "How did you know?" he said. "The odor," Ava said. "Thallium compounds have a specific smell profile in the breath, metallic with a slight sweetness. It's easy to miss if you're not looking for it." "Nursing school doesn't teach that?" "No," Ava agreed, "it doesn't." The pause that followed was the kind that has weight to it. Hale held her gaze for a moment longer than was strictly necessary, and then he said, "You're on this case. Don't step outside your scope, but don't step away either. I want you in the room." It was not an apology. It was not close to an apology, but it was something, and Ava recognized it for what it was without making the mistake of treating it as more than that. "Understood," she said, and turned back to the gurney. Maya Driscoll's eyes found Ava's face. They were clearer than they had been, not clear, not yet, but moving in the right direction, the way eyes move when a body has been given something it desperately needed and is cautiously beginning to respond. Her lips moved. Ava leaned closer. "My brother," Maya said. Her voice was barely there, a thread of sound thin and frayed. "Is he here?" "He's right outside," Ava said. "He's been here the whole time." Something crossed Maya's face. Not quite relief, something older and more complicated than relief, the specific emotion of someone who has been through something terrible and has discovered on the other side of it that the person they needed most was exactly where they hoped they would be. "He's going to be so angry," she whispered. "He's not angry," Ava said. "He's scared. There's a difference." Maya's eyes stayed on her face. "You know him." "I spent some time with him in the hallway." A pause. Did he do something when he got here?" Ava considered the diplomatic version of the answer and decided that Maya Driscoll, given everything she was dealing with, deserved something closer to the truth. "He was upset," she said. "He's calm now." Maya closed her eyes. "I told him not to come. I told him I'd call him when I knew something." She exhaled. "He doesn't listen." "No," Ava said. "He doesn't. That's also not the same as not caring." A faint, exhausted sound escaped Maya that might have been the beginning of a laugh if she'd had more left in her. Then she said quieter, "They did it on purpose." You should know that. It wasn't an accident. I know, Ava said. Maya opened her eyes. How? Your brother told me what you said about what you saw. The monitor showed her heart rate ticking up, not into dangerous territory, but elevated the spike of a body responding to the activation of fear. Ava put her hand on Maya's arm gently over the bandages. You don't have to tell me anything right now, Ava said. You focus on breathing. Everything else can wait. It can't wait, Maya said. Her voice had steadied, slightly gone from a thread to something with a little more body to it. The chelation was moving fast. They know I know. If I'm in here, they know where I am. They're going to... You're safe in this hospital, Ava said. You don't know these people. Ava looked at her. Quietly, she said, I know a lot of different kinds of people. Tell me what you need. Maya looked at her for a long moment, this woman in scrubs, who had somehow in the middle of everything become the most grounding presence in the room. I need you to not let them tell Nolan too much yet, she said. He'll go after them. He will absolutely go after them, and he'll end up in prison or worse, and I can't. Her voice cracked. She pressed it back together. I can't lose him. Okay, Ava said. I'll manage what he hears for now. You can do that. I can try. Torres appeared at Ava's elbow. Dr. Hale wants you at the station. They're setting up the tox consult, and he wants you on the call. Ava looked at Maya. Maya gave a small, tight nod. Ava followed Torres out through the double doors. Nolan Driscoll moved the instant she appeared. He was there before she had taken 3 steps into the corridor, his enormous frame filling her immediate field of vision, his eyes fixed on her face with the focused desperation of a man who has been waiting for information and has run out of patience for waiting. Tell me, he said. She's going to be okay, Ava said first. She said it first because it was true and because everything else could only be heard correctly if that was established first. He exhaled. It was the sound of something structural, giving way, not breaking, but releasing. He pressed one hand to his face, covered his eyes for a moment, and when he brought it down again, his expression had changed. Softer, rawer. The way faces look when the adrenaline drops far enough to let what's underneath it show. What was wrong with her, he said. Ava chose her words carefully. She was exposed to a toxic compound. We've identified it and we're treating it. She's stable. What compound? The medical team is in contact with a specialist right now. We'll know more in the next hour. Nolan looked at her. His eyes narrowed very slightly, not with suspicion exactly, but with the reading between the lines quality of a man who has had enough conversations in his life where people told him partial truths dressed up as complete ones. You know more than you're saying. I know what's being done for her, Ava said. The details are going to come from the doctor. Maya told you something, didn't she? It wasn't a question. Ava held his gaze. She told me she wanted to see you. That's the most important thing right now. The partial deflection worked because it was true and because Nolan Driscoll loved his sister with the particular uncomplicated ferocity of someone who has had very few people in his life and holds the ones he has with everything he's got. His face shifted again back toward the thing that mattered most. Can I see her? In a few minutes. They're getting her settled. Ava paused. When you go in there, she needs calm. She needs to feel like you're okay, even if you're not. Can you do that? He looked at her steadily. You keep asking me if I can do things. I keep meaning it as a genuine question, she said. Something passed through his expression, wary but not unfriendly. I can do that, he said. Sandra appeared at Ava's shoulder. Her voice was quieter than it had been all morning. Lane, Dr. Hale wants you at the station for the tox call. Ava nodded. To Nolan, I'll come get you as soon as she's ready for visitors. He nodded, then Lane. She turned back. Thank you, he said. Simple, direct, with none of the performance that gratitude sometimes carries. Just the words themselves placed cleanly in the air between them. Ava said, don't thank me yet, and meant it, and went to take the call. The toxicology consult was conducted over speakerphone with a specialist named Dr. Reeves, who worked out of a university hospital 2 cities over, and who spoke with the efficient, slightly impatient cadence of someone who was very good at what they did and was accustomed to being the smartest person in any given conversation about it. He confirmed the thallium assessment within the first 4 minutes. He expanded on the treatment protocol. He asked several sharp, specific questions about the exposure pathway, and when Ava answered 2 of them accurately, without hesitation, with the kind of specificity that is not typically associated with a first-week floor nurse. There was a brief pause on the line. "Who am I speaking with?" Dr. Reeves said. "Ava Lane. I'm a nurse on the trauma floor." Another pause. "Where did you train?" Hale, who was standing to Ava's left, and who had been watching the call with the slightly conflicted expression of a man whose competence is being reflected back at him from an unexpected source, said, "She's one of ours." "She's very good," Reeves said with the brusqueness of a man giving a compliment while also already thinking about the next things. "You said the patient mentioned an industrial facility. Do you know the specific compound used thallium sulfate can present differently depending on concentration and delivery method?" "The patient believes it was deliberate," Ava said. The line went quiet for a moment. "Deliberate," Reeves said. "She was going to report something she'd witnessed at the facility. She became symptomatic within 24 hours of indicating that intention to a colleague." "That's not a medical determination," Hale said sharp. "It's relevant clinical context," Ava said. "The delivery pathway affects treatment specificity." Reeves said, "She's right. If this was intentional exposure, we're looking at a carefully measured dose rather than an accident, which changes how we calibrate the chelation. A workplace accident would typically involve higher acute exposure. Deliberate poisoning tends towards slower sustained dosing designed to look like illness progression." He paused. "Your instincts were correct to flag this." Hale said nothing. His hand moved against the counter just once, just slightly, the smallest possible physical expression of a man adjusting to new information. Ava filed it away and moved on. After the call, the trauma floor settled into a different rhythm. Not calm, the ER was never calm, but the specific, purposeful hum of a department that has navigated a crisis and is now managing its aftermath. Maya Driscoll was moved to a monitored room. The police were called. Hale made that call himself, which was the right call, and Ava noted that he made it without being prompted. 2 officers arrived within the hour, and they were professional and thorough, and they took Maya's initial statement with the careful patience of people who understood that the woman they were speaking to had almost died and needed to be treated accordingly. Ava was not in the room for that conversation. She was in the hallway standing beside Nolan Driscoll, who had finally been allowed to see his sister and had come back out 20 minutes later with red-rimmed eyes and a jaw so tightly held that it was doing most of the emotional work his face was refusing to do. He didn't say anything for a while. Ava didn't push. Eventually he said, "She told me a little about what she saw at the facility." Ava waited. "They were falsifying safety reports," he said. "The chemicals they were using, the disposal methods, she said they were documenting safe handling and then disposing of everything off the books. She found the real records. She photographed them." His voice was very controlled, the kind of control that takes active maintenance. "She was going to take them to the EPA. She told one person she thought she could trust, and 2 days later, she's in here." "Did she say who she told?" "Her supervisor." His hands opened and closed. "Man named Garrett. She'd worked with him for 3 years. She thought—" He stopped. "She thought he was one of the good ones." Ava said carefully, "The police are with her now." "I know." His voice had gone flat in a way that made Ava pay closer attention. "The police are good at finding out what happened. They're not always good at keeping it from happening again." "What does that mean?" He looked at her sideways. "It means the people who did this to her have lawyers and resources, and people who make problems disappear. And it means Maya is lying in a hospital bed after almost being killed, and the man who put her there is probably sitting in an office somewhere being very relaxed about all of it." Ava said nothing. "I'm not going to do anything stupid," he said, reading the silence accurately. "I know that's what you're thinking." "I'm thinking you're angry," she said, "and you have every right to be. But Maya told me she needs you intact," Ava said. Those were not her exact words, but that was the meaning. That landed. She saw it land, saw the tight set of his shoulders shift just slightly, the way a body shifts when it absorbs something true. He looked at the floor. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said unexpectedly, "You're different." She waited. "I've been in a lot of hospitals," he said, "not as a patient usually, waiting rooms mostly, waiting for people." He said the last 2 words with a weight that implied the waiting had not always ended well. "The nurses, some of them are kind, some of them are professional, some of them are both, but you're doing something else. You walk into a room and something changes. I noticed it when you came out in that hallway. He was looking at her now, directly with the unsettling attention of a very large man who has spent his life reading situations accurately because his survival required it. Who are you actually? Ava said. I told you, my name is Ava. I'm a nurse here. That's not all you are. No, she said. It's not. The acknowledgement surprised him. He hadn't expected her to confirm it, she could tell. He had expected the deflection to continue. He looked at her for a long moment, recalibrating. Are you going to tell me the rest? He said. Not today, she said. Today is about Maya. He accepted this reluctantly, but he accepted it. He nodded once, and then he said, is she actually going to be okay? I need you to tell me straight, not the hospital version, the real version. Ava looked at him. She said without softening it, we caught it in time. The chelation is working. The next 12 hours are important, and I'm not going to tell you there's zero risk because that wouldn't be true. But she's fighting hard, and we have a good protocol, and the specialist is monitoring everything. She paused. She's going to be okay. That's my honest read. He exhaled again, slower this time, like a man who had been holding his breath since the phone rang and was only now beginning to believe he might be allowed to breathe again. Okay, he said quietly. They stood in the hallway for a moment, not speaking. Around them, the ER moved and breathed and made its noise. Then Sandra appeared, moving quickly from the direction of the nursing station, and her face had a quality to it that Ava recognized immediately, the look of someone who is carrying information they would rather not be carrying. Lane, she said, and there was something new in the way she said it. Not sharp, not dismissive, just direct, like she was talking to a colleague. Dr. Hale wants to see you in his office. Ava said, now. Now, Sandra confirmed. She glanced at Nolan, then back at Ava. He said to tell you it's not about the case. The two of them looked at each other for a moment, and something passed between them. The recognition that it was absolutely about the case and that Dr. Hale saying it wasn't was his way of indicating that the conversation was going to be something other than what Ava might expect. I'll be back, Ava said to Nolan. He nodded. He was watching her with those dark, careful eyes. I'll be here, he said. Hale's office was at the end of the administrative corridor, a corner room large enough to contain a desk and 2 chairs and a wall of credentials that made its own argument about the kind of man who occupied the space. He was standing when Ava came in, not sitting, standing behind his desk with his arms crossed and an expression that was doing a significant amount of work managing whatever was happening underneath it. He waited until she closed the door. Then he said, I pulled your file this morning. Ava said nothing. It's thin, he said, very thin. Your nursing license is current, your credentials check out, your references are positive, but there are gaps, significant ones, periods where your employment history just stops, years where nothing is documented. He unfolded his arms. I've been doing this for 22 years. I've hired a lot of people. I know what a file looks like when someone has a normal work history and what it looks like when someone has had their records managed. Ava kept her expression neutral. Your records, Hale said, have been managed. The silence in the room had a specific texture. Ava let it sit for a moment before she responded. Is there a question in there? She said. Several, he said, but I'm going to start with the simplest one. He looked at her steadily. Who are you, Ava Lane? She held his gaze, the same way she had held the giant's gaze in the hallway, and the specialist questions on the phone, and the resident's uncertainty, and the charge nurse's condescension, and the patient's fear. With the particular stillness of a person who has stood in front of worse things in this moment and has learned that stillness is not the same as having nothing to say. She said, I'm the nurse who just saved your patient's life. Hale looked at her for a long moment. His jaw moved slightly. Then he said very quietly, that's not going to be enough of an answer. Not for much longer. Ava said, I know. And from down the corridor from the direction of Maya Driscoll's room, there was a sound, not a monitor alarm, not a crash cart, something different. A voice, sharp and sudden and cutting through the ambient noise of the floor like a blade through still water. It was Maya, and she was not calling for a nurse. She was calling for Ava. Ava was out of the office before Hale had time to finish the sentence he'd started. She moved down the corridor with the specific measured urgency of someone who has learned the difference between running toward danger and moving toward it, which is less about speed and more about arriving ready. She pushed through the door to Maya's room and found two things she had not expected. The first was that the police officers who had been taking Maya's statement were gone. Their chairs were still there, angled toward the bed, but they were empty. The second was that Maya was sitting up in her bed, partially against the pillow, her bandaged arms braced against the mattress, and she was staring at the door with an expression that had moved past fear and landed somewhere in the territory of something colder and more specific. "They left," Maya said when she saw Ava. "5 minutes ago. They got a call and they said they'd be back, but—" She stopped. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes were working something over the way eyes work when a person is deciding how much to say and to whom. "The call they got, I heard them talking before they left the room. I wasn't supposed to, I don't think, but the name they said," she pressed her lips together. "The name they said was Garrett." Ava crossed to the bed. "The man I told about the records," Maya said. Her voice was very steady in the way that voices get very steady when the alternative is falling apart. "My supervisor, the one who did this to me." She looked at Ava directly. "He's a friend of the police department, Ava. He sponsors their fundraisers. His brother-in-law is a precinct captain." She exhaled. "I didn't know that. I didn't know any of that until 2 weeks ago when I started digging." Ava said nothing for a moment. She sat down in the chair closest to the bed. "The photographs I took," Maya continued, lowered now, more urgent. "The real disposal records. I uploaded them to a drive. I have the link memorized. If those officers come back in here and ask me for evidence, I don't know if I can trust them with it." Ava looked at her. The room was very quiet. "You can trust me with it," she said. Maya studied her face. "Why should I?" It was a fair question. Ava gave it the answer it deserved. "Because 3 hours ago you were dying," she said, "and I'm the reason you're not. And because I don't have a brother-in-law who's a precinct captain, and no one in this building knows who I actually am, which means I'm probably the safest person in this hallway to hold on to something that someone very powerful does not want to exist." Maya stared at her. Something in her expression was shifting, the last of the holding back, the last of the measuring, giving way to the particular relief of someone who has been carrying something alone and has finally found a hand that seems steady enough to take some of the weight. "Give me the link," Ava said quietly, "and let me worry about what to do with it." Maya recited the link once. Just once, quietly, the way you say something you've been holding so tightly that releasing it feels like setting down a weight you forgot you were carrying. Ava repeated it back word for word without writing it down. Maya watched her do it and didn't ask how she was certain she'd remember it correctly. Something in Ava's expression made the question unnecessary. "There's a folder inside called Meridian Internal," Maya said. "Everything is in there, the real disposal logs, the falsified EPA submissions, the chain of approval signatures. 3 years of it, enough to shut them down completely if the right person gets it in front of the right eyes." "Do they know the drive exists?" Ava said. "Garrett knows I had documents. He doesn't know how I stored them or whether I made copies." Maya's voice was very careful, the way voices get when the person speaking is choosing each word to avoid the ones that might make her lose her composure. "But he's smart. He's been managing liability his whole career. If he's already making calls to the precinct, he's covering ground fast." "Then we move faster," Ava said. Maya looked at her. "You keep saying we." "Yes," Ava said. "Why?" Maya said. "You don't know me. You didn't know me 4 hours ago." Ava was quiet for a moment. She looked at Maya Driscoll, 24 years old, bandaged pale, sitting upright in a hospital bed with the precise posture of someone who is refusing to let their body communicate anything their mind hasn't authorized. And she thought about all the versions of this moment she had lived before. Different rooms, different names, different kinds of damage. The same essential truth, underneath all of it, someone had tried to silence a person who was telling the truth and the silence hadn't held. "Because you're right," Ava said simply, "and people who are right deserve someone in their corner." Maya held her gaze for a long moment. Then she looked down at her bandaged hands in her lap and said very quietly, "I was so scared. When I realized what was happening, when I felt myself getting sicker and I knew it wasn't random, I was terrified. I kept thinking nobody is going to believe me. They're going to say I'm paranoid. They're going to say I had an accident." She paused. "Nobody is going to believe the lab tech over the facility director." "The documents believe you," Ava said. "That's the only thing that matters now." Maya nodded. She was working to hold herself together, and she was doing it well, and Ava didn't crowd the moment. Then the door opened, and Nolan came in. He moved with the careful deliberateness of a man who had been told to be calm and was executing that instruction through sheer muscular effort. He crossed to his sister's bed, and he stood there looking at her with an expression that was too many things at once to name relief and rage and grief and love all running together into something that had no clean word for it. Maya looked up at him, and her composure, which had been impressive, came apart at the exact moment his did. She reached out one bandaged arm, and he took her hand in both of his so carefully it was almost painful to watch this enormous man holding his sister's hand like it was the most fragile thing he had ever been trusted with. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Maya said, "I'm okay." "I know," Nolan said. His voice was not steady. "I'm going to be okay." "I know," he said again. He pressed her hand between his. "I know." Ava moved toward the door to give them space. Nolan looked up. "Stay," he said. It wasn't a request exactly. It was the way people talk when they have decided that a certain person belongs in a certain room and are not prepared to negotiate it. Ava stayed. She stood near the wall while brother and sister talked in low voices, Maya telling him some of it, not all of it, the carefully edited version that included enough truth to be fair and excluded enough to keep him from doing something that would land him on the wrong side of all of this. Nolan listened. His jaw worked. His hands stayed gentle around hers. At one point he said, "I'm going to find Garrett." "No," Maya said. "Maya." "No," she said again, and her voice had something in it that stopped him. Something that was not weakness and not pleading and not fear. It was the voice of a woman who has made a decision and is not going to be moved off it. You are going to sit in that chair, and you are going to let people who know how to handle this handle it. You coming in here like a wrecking ball is not going to help me. It is going to get you arrested or killed, and I am not going to survive this by myself. Do you understand that?" The silence that followed was the kind that contains an entire argument that has already been decided. Nolan sat in the chair. Maya looked at Ava. Ava gave her the smallest possible nod. It was an hour later when Dr. Hale found Ava at the nursing station. He had his phone in his hand and an expression that suggested whatever was on it had shifted the ground under his feet. "I made some calls," he said. Ava kept her eyes on the chart she was reviewing. About you." He set the phone down on the counter between them, face down, which was its own kind of statement. Whatever he had learned, he wasn't leading with it. "I have a contact at Bethesda Naval, 19 years. We went to medical school together." He paused. "When I describe what I was seeing from you today, the clinical instincts, the field knowledge, the way you handled Driscoll in that hallway, he asked me your name." Ava looked up. When I told him, Hale said he was quiet for about 10 seconds, which is the longest I've ever heard that man be quiet about anything. He held her gaze. Then he said, and I am quoting directly, "Do not mess with her, Marcus. Don't question her. Don't challenge her. Just put her where she needs to be and get out of the way." The nursing station was busy around them. Phones ringing, residents moving, the ordinary noise of the floor, but it felt for a moment like a bubble had formed around the two of them. Ava said nothing. "He wouldn't tell me more than that," Hale said. "Your records are classified beyond a level I have any access to. Whatever you did before you walked into this hospital, it was not something that gets put in a standard personnel file." He paused. "I want to know what we're dealing with." "You're dealing with a nurse," Ava said. "Who knows her job?" Ava. It was the first time he had used her first name. The shift was small but real, from institutional authority to something more human, more direct. She recognized it. "I'm not going to be able to explain my background in a way that satisfies you," she said. "What I can tell you is that I am not a liability to this hospital or to your patients. The opposite." "I can see that," he has said. He picked up his phone again, held it without looking at it. "The police officers who took Maya Driscoll's initial statement, they left before completing the report." "I know." His eyes sharpened. "Do you know why?" "Maya has a theory," Ava said. "I think it's worth taking seriously." Hale put the phone in his pocket, crossed his arms. "She thinks they're connected to the facility. She thinks her supervisor is connected to the precinct. She has reason to believe it. If that's true, then the standard reporting chain is compromised," he said. "Yes," Ava said. He was quiet for a moment. She could see him processing it, working through the implications with the systematic thoroughness of a man who had managed complex problems in high-stakes environments for 2 decades. So who does she report to, he said. If she can't trust the local precinct, federal, Ava said. EPA directly given the nature of the violations. Possibly FBI if the deliberate poisoning angle holds. And the evidence, Ava said, secured. He looked at her. The word had landed with a specificity that told him more than the single syllable contained. You have it, he said. It was not a question. It's accessible, she said. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he made a decision. She could see it happen the way decisions that matter show up in people's faces when they're being honest. He uncrossed his arms. What do you need from me, he said. The question surprised her, though she didn't show it. She had expected continued resistance. She had expected the institutional reflex to protect the hospital, protect the hierarchy, redirect this into channels he could manage and control. What she had not expected was for Marcus Hale to simply ask what she needed. 2 things, she said. First, Maya Driscoll's room needs to be secured. I don't want anyone in or out without your direct authorization or mine. Not police, not administration, not anyone until we know who we can trust. Hale nodded. And second, I need access to a secure line, Ava said. Not the hospital network. Something private. He studied her. You want to make a call? Yes. To whom? She held his gaze steadily. Someone who can get those documents to the right federal desk before Garrett's lawyers file an injunction or his precinct contacts make the evidence chain disappear. The silence stretched for 3 long seconds. Then Hale reached into his coat pocket and produced a personal cell phone, not his hospital-issued one, a separate one, older model, the kind of phone a person carries specifically because it is not connected to anything institutional. He set it on the counter in front of her. My personal line, he said, untraceable to the hospital. Ava picked it up. She looked at him. Thank you. Don't thank me, he said, and there was an echo in it. She had said the same words to Nolan hours earlier in a different context with the same meaning. Some debts were too early to settle. Just make sure that woman in there gets justice. Ava took the phone to the supply room at the end of the corridor. She closed the door. She stood in the quiet for a moment, and then she dialed a number from memory, a number she had not dialed in 14 months, a number she had told herself she would not dial again, unless the situation was one she couldn't resolve by any other means. It rang twice. The voice that answered was male middle-aged with the particular flatness of someone who has learned to strip all affect from their vocal delivery because affect is information and information is liability. Lane, the voice said, not a greeting, a confirmation. I need a federal contact, Ava said. EPA and potentially FBI. I have documented evidence of industrial chemical dumping and a deliberate poisoning. The local police chain is compromised. I need someone clean. A pause. Brief. You're working? I'm a nurse, she said. Right. The flatness of it contains something that might have been amusement in a different person. Send me what you have. I need a name first, she said. Someone I can hand this off to directly. Someone who will protect the source. The source being a 24-year-old lab technician who almost died this morning for doing the right thing, Ava said. She needs protection, not exposure. Another pause longer. The kind of pause that contains actual thinking rather than performance. Then, I know someone at the EPA's Criminal Investigations Division. She's clean. She's aggressive. She doesn't owe favors to anyone in the industrial sector. Name and contact. He gave them. Ava memorized them the way she memorized everything cleanly, completely filed in the specific architecture of a memory that had been trained to hold things without writing them down. Lane, the voice said before she could hang up. Yes. You doing okay out there? She paused. It was an unusual question from an unusual source. I'm doing what needs doing, she said. That's not what I asked. She thought about it, about the last 6 days, about the water pitchers and the vital signs and the way Sandra had looked at her and the way Hale had spoken to her and the particular specific smallness of being underestimated by people who had no idea what they were looking at. About Maya Driscoll's tremoring hands, about Nolan's face when he pressed his fingers to his eyes. Yeah, she said, I'm okay. Good, the voice said and hung up. She stood in the supply room for another 30 seconds. Then she went back out. The next 2 hours moved fast. Ava forwarded the drive link through an encrypted channel to the EPA investigator, a woman named Cora Vance, who responded within 20 minutes with a confirmation that was brief, professional, and carried the specific energy of someone who had been waiting for exactly this kind of case to land in front of her. Vance indicated that a federal agent would be at St. Mercy within 3 hours to take Maya's formal statement and establish protective custody protocols. Ava relayed this to Maya without using the word protective custody because Maya was already carrying enough weight and the phrase carried connotations that would add fear to an equation that already had more than enough of it. Someone is coming to help, she said. Someone who doesn't have ties to Garrett or the precinct. She's federal. She's serious. All you have to do is tell her what you told me. Maya was quiet for a moment. Her color was better. The chelation protocol was continuing to work, and Dr. Reeves had called back twice to check in, which Ava took as his own kind of good sign. You made that call fast, Maya said. I had a good number to call. Maya looked at her with that particular expression. She kept returning to the one that said she was continuously revising her estimate of what Ava Lane actually was and finding that the revision kept having to go further than the previous one. Who are you? She said. Not the way Nolan had asked it, with confusion and a kind of protective wariness, but with the quiet directness of a woman who was genuinely curious and had decided she'd earned the right to ask. Someone who spent a long time in situations where the only way out was through, Ava said, and who decided when that part of her life was over that she wanted to spend the next part making sure other people got through too. Maya absorbed this. The Navy, she said softly. Nolan said you mentioned something in the hallway, that you'd been in more dangerous situations. I didn't mean to say that much, Ava said. But you did. Maya paused. SEALs. Ava said nothing, which was its own answer. Maya let out a long, slow breath. And you became a nurse. Combat medicine was always the part that felt most like something I could carry forward, Ava said. The rest of it, I was good at it. But this is the part that doesn't leave residue. There was something in that last word that made Maya go quiet in a particular way, the way people go quiet when they understand that the person in front of them has seen things they can't fully imagine and has made peace with it in the only way available, which is by redirecting the capability towards something generative. She didn't push further. She just nodded. Then Nolan, who had been sitting in the chair against the wall with his arms on his knees and his head slightly bowed, said residue. Both women looked at him. He raised his head. He had been listening quietly still with the particular attention of someone who takes information in through his whole body rather than just his ears. I know what that word means. When someone says it that way, he said. He was looking at Ava. I've got some of my own. Ava met his eyes. I know, she said. Different field, and he said. Different field, she agreed. Something passed between them. Not explained, not elaborated on, but recognized. The shorthand of people who have operated in places that most people never go, where the rules that govern ordinary life are suspended, and you find out what you actually are under pressure. People like that can usually identify each other. They usually don't need to say much to do it. Sandra appeared at the door. Her face was different from what it had been at the start of the shift, stripped of the particular professional armor she wore as a default, replaced with something more uncertain and more genuine. Lane, she said. There are 2 men at the front desk asking for Dr. Hale. They said they're from corporate compliance. They say they received a report about an incident this morning, and they're here to conduct a review. Ava was on her feet before Sandra had finished the sentence. What kind of review? She said. They didn't specify. Sandra paused. One of them asked specifically for information about the patient in this room. Maya's expression changed immediately, the fear coming back, different from before, sharper and more focused. Nolan stood up. He was suddenly very tall and very still, in the way that large men become still when they are deciding whether to move. Maya, Ava said, quiet and direct. Nobody is coming into this room without Hale's authorization. I'm going to go find out who these men are. Corporate compliance, Nolan said, and the words in his mouth sounded like something he was chewing and finding bitter. Garrett has people. He has a whole team of people who make things go away quietly. I know, Ava said. To Nolan, you stay here. Do not open that door for anyone except Hale or me. Can you do that? He looked at her. Then he moved to stand beside the door, positioning himself with the particular practiced solidity of a man who has served as a physical barrier before and knows exactly how to do it. "I can do that," he said. Ava went out into the corridor. The two men from corporate compliance were at the nursing station talking to a young resident who looked uncomfortable in the particular way of someone who has been asked a question they're not sure they should answer. The men were in suits, clean, unremarkable suits that were designed to communicate authority without spectacle. One of them had a tablet. The other had a phone pressed to his ear. Ava walked up to them. "Can I help you?" she said. The man with the tablet looked at her badge. "We're here from Meridian Industrial's legal compliance office," he said. "We have information that one of our former employees is currently being treated here, and we have a legal interest in—" "You're from Meridian," Ava said. Not a question. "That's right, and this hospital is a private medical facility," Ava said. "Patient information is protected under federal privacy law. You don't have a legal interest in anyone's treatment here. You have the same access as any member of the public, which is none." The man with the tablet blinked. He had clearly expected a different kind of conversation, the kind where a floor nurse presented with men in suits claiming legal authority deferred to the implied weight of that authority and went to find a supervisor. "We'd like to speak with Dr. Hale," he said, recovering. "Dr. Hale is unavailable," Ava said. "When will he be available?" "When he decides to be." The man's expression tightened. He looked at his colleague who had lowered his phone and was now watching Ava with an expression that was doing a reassessment of its own. "Mr. Lane," she said. "Ava Lane." The man with the phone, the quieter one, the one who had been listening rather than speaking, repeated her name back, very quietly, as though he was filing it. "Ms. Lane," he said, "we're not here to cause any disruption. We're here to ensure that our company's interests are properly represented in the event that—" What? Ava said. He paused. "In the event that any statements made by the patient in question create a legal liability for the company that poisoned her," Ava said. The corridor went very quiet. The young resident who had been standing at the nursing station found somewhere else to be in approximately 2 seconds. Sandra behind the counter had gone completely still. The man in the suit looked at Ava for a long moment. His expression had not changed, which was its own kind of information. The expression of a man who has been trained to receive difficult words without reaction, who has been in enough rooms where the truth was said aloud and has learned to not let it show that the truth landing publicly is a problem. "That's a serious allegation," he said. "It's a documented fact," Ava said, "and the documentation is no longer in a location that your company controls. So whatever you came here to do, it's already too late." The second man's jaw shifted just slightly, but she caught it. "I think," the first man said carefully, "that we should wait for Dr. Hale." "I think," Ava said, "that you should wait outside, in the lobby. And I think that when Dr. Hale is ready to speak with you, if he decides he wants to, he will have the hospital's legal counsel present. And I think that between now and then, you should not speak to any member of this staff or attempt to access any patient information or approach any patient room." The two men looked at each other. Ava waited. The first man put his tablet under his arm. He straightened his jacket. He produced from somewhere in his expression a version of composure that was supposed to communicate that this interaction had gone exactly as he intended and that he was departing on his own terms. "We'll wait in the lobby," he said. "Thank you," Ava said. She watched them go, watched them all the way to the end of the corridor and through the double doors toward the waiting area. Then she turned back to Sandra, who was looking at her with an expression that had traveled a very long distance from where it had started that morning. "You're going to need to call security and ask them to keep those men in the lobby," Ava said, "and tell them not to let them back on this floor without Dr. Hale personally escorting them." Sandra said, "Okay, just okay. No starch, no authority, just the words simple and immediate from one person to another." Ava went to find Hale. She found him in the trauma bay, not working, just standing, his hands in his pockets, his attention directed at nothing in particular, in the way that attention is directed at nothing when it is actually directed entirely inward. He turned when he heard her step. She told him about the men from Meridian. He listened without interrupting, which was different from how he had listened to her at the beginning of the day. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "They moved fast." "They had to," she said. Garrett knew Maya was here the moment the ambulance report was filed. He's been running containment since this morning. And the federal contact, Hale said. 3 hours, Ava said. Maybe less. He nodded slowly. He looked at her not with the assessment of a supervisor evaluating a subordinate, but with the look of someone who is standing next to a person and is genuinely trying to understand what they're seeing. The person you called, he said, your contact. Who is that? Someone I worked with before, she said. Before, he said. Before this. Yes. He absorbed it. He looked at the floor, then back up. I owe you an apology, he said, for this morning, the way I spoke to you when you first arrived. You didn't know, she said. I made assumptions, he said, about who you were, what you were capable of, based on nothing except the fact that you were new and quiet and seemed too. He stopped. He was a man who chose his words carefully when the words cost something. Too composed, he said finally. It made me assume you hadn't earned it. Composure is usually something you earn the hard way, Ava said. Yes, he said. I understand that now. They stood in the trauma bay for a moment, the two of them, in the particular quiet that settles between people who have been through something together and are standing on the other side of it, figuring out where they are. Then Hale's phone rang. He looked at the screen. Something in his face changed, sharpened, went very focused, very fast. He answered it. Ava watched his expression as he listened. She read it the way she read everything, quickly, accurately, looking for the thing that mattered underneath the surface of it. What she saw in the first 10 seconds told her that whatever was coming through that phone was not part of any version of the situation she had mapped out. He lowered the phone. He looked at her directly. That was the hospital administrator, he said. We've received a court filing. Meridian's lawyers have filed an emergency injunction. He paused. To compel the release of Maya Driscoll's full medical record, and to restrict her from making any public statements about her condition or its cause. He held her gaze. They filed it 20 minutes ago. It's already been approved by a judge. The silence that followed was the kind that contains a recalculation. Ava said, which judge? Hale looked at the phone, read a name. Ava had never heard it before. But the way the man from Meridian had lowered his phone in the corridor, the quiet contained satisfaction in that gesture, told her that this judge was not a coincidence. This was Garrett's network operating at speed, cutting off exits before anyone inside them realized the walls were moving. She needed Cora Vance in this building faster than 3 hours. She was already moving toward the door when Hale said her name. She looked back. Whatever you need, he said. Whatever it takes. You have my full support. She held his gaze for one moment. Then she went. Ava moved through the corridor with the kind of speed that doesn't look like running, but covers ground faster than most people's running does. She had the borrowed phone in her hand before she cleared the trauma bay door, and she had Cora Vance's number dialed before she reached the stairwell. Vance picked up on the second ring. They filed an injunction, Ava said without preamble. Emergency order? It's already been approved. They're going to try to pull her medical records and gag her from talking publicly about the cause of her condition. A beat of silence. Then Vance said with the flat precision of someone shifting from standard operating speed to something faster. Who's the judge? Ava gave her the name Hale had read from the phone. Another beat. Longer. That's Garrett's golf partner, Vance said. I assumed, Ava said. The injunction won't hold at the federal level, Vance said, but it doesn't need to hold. It just needs to slow you down long enough for them to get control of the narrative and bury the evidence chain. She paused. The drive, is it still accessible? Yes. I need you to share it with me right now. Not in an hour, right now. I'm sending it in the next 60 seconds, Ava said. How far out are you? 90 minutes, Vance said. Maybe less if I push it. Push it, Ava said and hung up. She sent the drive link through the encrypted channel in 40 seconds. She counted them. Then she stood in the stairwell for one moment, just one, with her back against the wall and her eyes on the ceiling, and the particular stillness of a person who is between actions and is using the gap to make sure their hands aren't shaking. They weren't. They never were. That was the thing about her hands. She went back to Maya's room. Nolan was still at the door. He read her face the instant she came through and said, "What happened?" They filed a court order, she said. She kept her voice even. She needed him even, and she knew that if she gave him anything to react to in her own tone, he would find it and amplify it, and amplified was not what this moment needed. It's a legal maneuver. It's not going to work. The federal contact is on her way. A court order, he repeated. His voice was very flat. They tried to kill her, and now they're filing court orders. That's how these people operate, Ava said. They use systems. When the system fails them, they use a different system. What they're not expecting is someone who knows how to operate in the gaps between systems. He looked at her steadily. And that's you. That's me today, she said. Maya was sitting up straighter than she had been. The color in her face was continuing to improve, which meant the chelation was doing exactly what it was supposed to do, and Ava noted it and felt a specific clean satisfaction at it, the satisfaction of having been right when it mattered most. I heard some of that, Maya said. I know, Ava said. They got a judge to sign off that fast. Maya's jaw tightened. They've been planning for this possibility. They had this ready, which means they knew before they hurt me that if I survived, they'd need to contain it legally. Yes, Ava said. That's exactly what it means. That's premeditated, Maya said. Her voice had a quality in it now. Not fear something that had burned through fear and come out the other side harder. That's not just covering up pollution. That's organized. That's coordinated across multiple people, the facility management, the lawyers, the judge. Possibly more, Ava said. Then it's bigger than Garrett, Maya said. Much bigger, Ava said, which is exactly why the federal level matters. Cora Vance is EPA criminal investigations. She deals with networks, not individuals. She's been looking for an entry point into something like this for a long time. Maya processed this. Her fingers were moving very slightly in her lap. Not the tremor of the thallium, now something different. The movement of a person whose mind is working very fast and whose hands are expressing the speed of it. The documents I photographed, she said, the approval signatures on the false filings, there were names above Garrett, people I didn't recognize. I assumed they were corporate officers above his pay grade. Do you remember them? Ava said. I remember everything in that folder, Maya said. I looked at it enough times to memorize it. I was trying to figure out who to go to. When Vance gets here, Ava said, you tell her everything you remember, every name, every number, every date. Don't edit it. Don't decide what matters and what doesn't. Let her build the picture. Okay, Maya said. Then, what about the injunction if they have a court order saying I can't? A state court order has no weight against a federal criminal investigation, Ava said. When Vance gets here, she supersedes the injunction. The judge who signed it can argue about it later in a courtroom where Garrett's lawyers won't have home advantage. Nolan made a sound low, involuntary, the kind of sound that's almost a laugh, but isn't. You know a lot about the law for a nurse, he said. I spent a lot of time around people who operated in environments where knowing the law meant the difference between coming home and not, Ava said. He held her gaze. Something in him settled not all the way, not the part of him that was still furious and still calculating what he wanted to do to the man named Garrett, but the part that needed to believe there was a plan. That part settled. Then Sandra's voice came through the door, and Sandra's voice had an edge to it that immediately told Ava that something had changed on the floor. Lane. She was keeping her volume controlled, which meant she was also keeping it from carrying further than necessary. You need to come out here. Ava was at the door. What? Sandra looked at her with the expression of someone who has just received information and is not sure how to contextualize it. The two men from Meridian, she said. They're not in the lobby anymore. Security was supposed to. Security can't find them, Sandra said. They went to the restrooms 20 minutes ago and they haven't come back. And the security camera in the east stairwell went offline about 15 minutes ago. Ava was already moving. Lock this room, she said to Nolan. Don't open it for anyone. I mean anyone. She heard the lock click before she reached the end of the corridor. The east stairwell was at the opposite end of the trauma floor from where Ava was. She moved toward it with the controlled speed she had learned in environments where moving too fast announced you and moving too slow cost you, and she was calibrating it exactly the way you calibrate things when they are built into your muscle memory rather than your conscious thought. She hit the stairwell door and pushed through. The man on the stairs above her had not heard her coming. He was talking on his phone low and fast, and he stopped when he registered her presence, and the stopping itself told her everything she needed to know about why he was there. Innocent people startle. People doing something they shouldn't don't startle, they freeze and reassess because startle is a reflex, but reassessment is a survival strategy. He was reassessing her now. This floor is restricted access, Ava said. I was looking for the restroom, the man said. He was not the man with the tablet. He was younger, less polished, wearing the suit the way someone wears something they put on for a specific purpose rather than because it's their default. He had the phone still in his hand, and his thumb moved slightly against the screen, and Ava recognized the gesture. He was either sending a message or he had just finished sending one. The restroom is on the ground floor, accessible from the lobby, Ava said, which is where you're supposed to be. Right, he said. Sorry, I got turned it around. He started to come down the stairs. Ava did not move out of his way. He stopped. They were very close in a very small space. He was taller than her by 6 inches and outweighed her by 60 pounds, and he was looking at her with the expression of a man who has made certain assumptions about the physical geometry of this situation and is currently revising them because something in the way she was standing was telling him things that her size and her scrubs and her lanyard were not. Which floor were you on? Ava said. I told you I got... Which floor? She said again. Quiet. Absolute. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said second. The second floor was medical records. Ava stepped to the side. He went past her quickly without looking back. She heard him hit the ground floor door 30 seconds later. She went up to the second floor. The medical records department at St. Mercy was a staffed room. 2 clerks during the day shift with access logs maintained for every file pulled. Ava went to the desk. The clerk on duty was a woman named Patricia, who had worked there for 11 years and who had the unflappable demeanor of someone who has handled enough unusual requests to not be surprised by them. Has anyone been in here in the last 15 minutes? Ava said. Patricia looked up. A man in a suit came in about 12 minutes ago, said he was from the hospital's corporate compliance office. He asked about a recent admission. What name did he give you? He didn't, Patricia said, and her voice carried the slight sharpness of someone who has just now registered that this was an anomaly she should have flagged at the time. He had a business card, but I didn't look at it closely. He asked about the system and then said never mind and left. Did he access any terminals? He was near the guest station, Patricia said. She turned to look at it. The screen was dark, which could mean it had timed out, or it could mean someone had cleared it deliberately. I don't think he logged in. I need you to pull the access log for the last 20 minutes and check if anyone queried Maya Driscoll's file, Ava said. And I need you to call IT security and have them review any external access attempts to the record system in the same window. Patricia was already reaching for her phone. Is this something I should be calling administration about? Dr. Hale, Ava said. Call Dr. Hale directly. Tell him what you told me. She left the records room and went back down to the trauma floor. She found Hale at the nursing station already on the phone, his expression tight and focused. He saw her and held up one finger. She waited. He hung up. The hospital's legal counsel is on the way in, he said, and I had security escort the 2 Meridian representatives out of the building. Physically out. They are no longer on the premises. One of them was on the second floor, Ava said, near medical records. Hale's expression didn't change, which meant it cost him something to keep it still. Were they able to access anything? I don't think so, she said. Patricia is checking the logs. But they tried. They came here with a legal injunction as the front door and someone going for the records as the back door. They were running both moves simultaneously. Coordinated, Hale said. Very, Ava said. He set his hands flat on the counter, looked at them for a moment, then looked up. This is bigger than a disgruntled employee and an industrial accident, he said. You knew that from the beginning. I suspected it, she said. Maya confirmed it. What does Vance say? She's moving fast. She needs to be here before Meridian's lawyers try to execute the injunction in person. Hale picked up his phone and dialed. He spoke briefly, efficiently in the clipped shorthand of a man who has spent decades communicating critical information in time-compressed situations. When he hung up, he said, I've asked the administrator to formally reject the injunction on the grounds that patient privacy law supersedes the state court order pending federal review. Our legal counsel is going to buy us time. Ava said, how much time? Enough, he said. Hopefully. She went back to Maya's room. When she opened the door, she found Nolan standing exactly where she had left him, and Maya sitting exactly as she had left her, and between them a silence that had the quality of a conversation that had been happening in the space where words weren't. She recognized it, the silence of two people who know each other well enough to be afraid together without making it worse by talking about it. "The men are gone," Ava said. "Out of the building." Nolan exhaled. Maya closed her eyes briefly and then opened them again. "They tried to get to my records," Maya said. It was not a question. "They tried," Ava said. "They didn't get there." "They're going to keep trying," Maya said. "Garrett doesn't stop. That's the thing I need you to understand about him. He is not someone who cuts his losses. He is someone who doubles down until there is nothing left to double down on." She paused. "He ruined 3 other people before me. A maintenance worker who raised safety concerns in 2019. His career was destroyed, his family lost their house, there was a campaign of harassment that lasted 2 years. A chemist in 2021 who tried to file an internal report, she ended up charged with theft of company property case, was eventually dropped, but the record stayed." Maya's voice was completely level. She was not speaking from fear right now. She was speaking from knowledge, and the knowledge was worse than fear. "He's practiced at this." "Then he's made mistakes," Ava said. "Practiced people make systemic mistakes. They reuse the same methods. They rely on the same contacts. Every name connected to those previous incidents is part of Vance's case now." Something shifted in Maya's face. "You're telling her about the others." "I'm going to," Ava said. "Do you have names?" "The maintenance worker was Robert Fisk," Maya said. "He lives in Caldwell now, I think. The chemist was Dr. Anita Borge. She moved to Portland after the case was dropped. I looked them up when I was trying to understand the pattern." She paused. "I wasn't the first, I thought I was for a while. Then I dug deeper and I realized I was just the next in line." "You're going to be the last," Ava said. The certainty in her voice was not performance. It was the specific, grounded certainty of someone who has assessed a situation completely and is stating a conclusion rather than expressing a hope. Maya looked at her for a long moment. "How can you be sure?" "Because the others didn't have what you have," Ava said. "They had their word against his. You have 3 years of documentation, a federal investigator with a clear chain of evidence, 2 additional victim witnesses, and the fact that they tried to kill you, which is a very different legal category from everything else they've done." Maya absorbed this. She looked at her hands. The bandages were clean white, carefully wrapped. Her hands were still. "I keep thinking about what I almost missed," she said quietly. "If I had gone home that night instead of staying late, if I hadn't noticed the smell, if I hadn't felt sick fast enough to call Nolan." She pressed her lips together. "If you hadn't been the one in the ER." Ava said nothing. "That's a lot of ifs," Nolan said from across the room. His voice was thick. "I don't like thinking about the ifs." "Neither do I," Maya said. She looked at him. "That's why I'm not going to think about them anymore." The room held a moment. Then Ava said, "Vance is going to ask you about the injection, when you felt it where you were, who was close to you. She's going to want to establish exact exposure point." "I know when it happened," Maya said. Her voice was very steady now. "There was a company lunch 2 weeks ago. Garrett personally handed me a bottle of water." She met Ava's eyes. "I thought it was strange at the time, because he never does that. He's not a warm person. I thought he was trying to make a gesture. I drank the whole bottle." The silence that followed had a very specific weight to it. Nolan said in a voice that was barely a voice at all, "He handed you the water." "Yes," Maya said. "He stood there and handed you a bottle of water that he'd—" He stopped. He pressed the back of his hand to his mouth and looked at the ceiling and breathed for a moment through his nose. When he brought his hand down, his expression was the most controlled thing about him. "Okay," he said. "Okay." "Nolan," Maya said. "I'm okay," he said. He was not okay. He was a man holding himself together with the force of a promise he had made to his sister and was not going to break. "I'm okay." Ava moved to stand near him without touching him, just near the way you stand near something that needs to feel that someone is close without needing to be managed. He registered it. He exhaled again slower. "The bottle," Ava said to Maya. "Do you still have it or know where it went?" "I threw it away at the facility," Maya said. "But the lunch was catered. There would have been a catering record. And Garrett has a security system in his office. He's paranoid about it, actually, which is ironic. There may be footage of him accessing something before the lunch. Tell Vance all of it, Ava said. Exactly like that. A knock at the door. Not the knock of someone with authority, more tentative, more careful. Ava opened it. Torres was there. The young resident who had confirmed the smell, who had run the extended metals panel, who had said she was right about the talk screen, in the quiet, careful way of someone who had decided to align himself with the truth before he fully understood the cost of it. He was holding a folder, and he looked like a man who had spent the last hour making a decision and had arrived at it. I did some reading, he said, his voice was low, on thallium poisoning protocols, and on the presentation patterns. He held the folder out to Ava. I wrote up my clinical observations from this morning. Everything I noticed, in the order I noticed it. The smell, the tremor pattern, the timing of the symptom progression. He paused. I thought it might be useful, as a corroborating clinical record from someone who was in the room. Ava looked at him. This is your own documentation, she said. Separate from the hospital chart. Yes, he said, my personal clinical notes. A doctor's personal clinical notes are admissible as evidence. He paused. I looked that up. Ava took the folder. She held his gaze for a moment. You understand what this means, she said. If this becomes part of a federal case, you'll be asked to testify to your observations. I know, Torres said, and you're prepared for that. He was quiet for a second, then, I became a doctor because I thought it meant something, helping people who were hurt. He glanced past Ava toward Maya briefly, then back. This feels like the same thing, just a different kind of hurt. Ava said, thank you. Torres nodded. He went back down the corridor. Sandra appeared behind where he had been, and this time she was moving with genuine urgency. Lane, there's a woman at the main entrance. She's asking for you by name. She has federal credentials. Ava felt something release in her chest. Not all the way, not until this was fully over, but a fraction. Enough. I'll be right there, she said. She turned back to the room. To Maya. She's here, she said. Maya closed her eyes for one full second. When she opened them, something in them had cleared. The fear was still there. It would be there for a long time, Ava knew, because that was the honest truth about what people carried out of situations like this one. But underneath it, or maybe alongside it, something else. Something that held its ground. Okay, Maya said, I'm ready. Cora Vance was nothing like what the phone had made her sound. On the call, she had been crisp and fast in all efficiency. In person, she was small, smaller than Ava, with close-cropped hair and dark eyes that moved over everything in a room with the speed and completeness of a scanner, and an expression that communicated that she had walked into situations significantly worse than this one, and had walked out the other side with everything she needed. She wore a federal badge on a lanyard and a jacket that had been put on in a hurry, and she was carrying a case bag that made a specific sound when it was set down, the sound of weight and purpose. She looked at Ava. You're Lane, she said. Yes. The contact speaks highly of you, she said. That's notable because the contact speaks highly of approximately no one. She extended her hand. Her grip was brief and firm. We need to move. The injunction gives them a window. I want to have Maya's statement on federal record before any state court officer shows up to execute it. How long before they try? Ava said. They filed at 10:40, Vance said. It's been approved. If I were Garrett's lawyer, I'd have a sheriff at the door by 2 o'clock. She checked her watch. We have under an hour. Then come with me, Ava said. She brought Vance to Maya's room. She did not facilitate the introduction, just opened the door and stepped back, because this was the moment where her role shifted, where the thing she had been holding transferred to hands that were specifically equipped to carry it the rest of the way. Vance looked at Maya. Maya looked at Vance. Ms. Driscoll, Vance said, and her voice was different now than it had been in the corridor lower, more deliberate, carrying a specific weight of acknowledgement. I've read your documentation. What you compiled over 3 years, the detail, the rigor most trained investigators couldn't do better. She sat down in the chair beside the bed. I want you to tell me everything. Start from the beginning. Don't skip anything because you think it's small. Maya looked at her for a moment. Then she looked at Ava. Ava gave her the nod. And Maya Driscoll, 24 years old, bandaged and pale and more composed than anyone in that room had any right to expect, began to talk. Ava went out into the corridor. She stood with her back against the wall, and she breathed and she let herself be still for a moment because she had not been still in several hours, and her body was reminding her that even trained stillness costs something. Hale found her there 3 minutes later. He stood beside her against the wall, not facing her. Both of them just leaning against the surface, looking at the floor of the corridor, the way people look at nothing when they're processing something. "Is she talking?" he said. "Yes," Ava said. "Good." He was quiet for a moment. Torres wrote up his clinical notes. "I know, I have them." "He didn't have to do that," Hale said. "No," Ava said. "He's a good doctor," Hale said. It was a simple statement, direct. "He's going to be a great one," Ava said. Another pause. Then Hale said without inflection, "My contact at Bethesda, he told me one other thing when I pushed him." Ava waited. "He said you saved 11 lives in a single operation," Hale said. "Under circumstances he declined to specify. He said it was the kind of thing that only got into the record because someone who was there felt it had to." He paused. "He said you were the most capable person he had ever seen in a field situation, and that losing you from active duty was the military's loss, and whoever had you next was lucky." The corridor was quiet around them. Ava said nothing for a moment. Then, "He oversells it." "He really doesn't seem like the type," Hale said. She looked at the wall across from her. She thought about 11. She thought about the weight of 11, the specific faces of 11, the way certain numbers don't stay as numbers, but become something else, something that lives in a particular chamber of your chest and doesn't leave, and you learn to breathe around it rather than through it. "Why nursing it?" Hale said. Not challenging, genuinely asking in the voice of a man who was asking because he actually wanted to understand. "Because in the field, you save someone, and then you move on," she said. "You don't get to see if they get better. You don't get to watch the crisis resolve and the person come back to themselves. You hand them off and you go." She paused. "I wanted to stay for the rest of it." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "For what it's worth, I'm glad you stayed for this one." The door to Maya's room opened. Vance appeared in the doorway. Her expression was controlled, but her eyes were doing something, carrying a particular energy, the energy of a person who has just received confirmation that what they suspected is significantly larger than they knew and is already mapping what that means. "Lane," she said, "I need you in here." Ava pushed off the wall. "There are names in that documentation that I recognize," Vance said low and fast as Ava crossed to her. "Federal names, not local, not state, federal contractors with EPA oversight responsibilities who have been on our radar for 2 years for taking payments." She paused. "This isn't a rogue facility, Director. This is a network with government reach, and Maya's documentation is the first clean evidence thread we've had that goes all the way through it." Ava held her gaze. "Which means Garrett is not the top," she said. "Garrett is barely the middle," Vance said. "Which also means the resources they've deployed today, the judge, the lawyers, the men they sent here are not a local operation. Someone higher up authorized this. Someone with the reach to get a judge on the phone in 2 hours and an injunction signed before lunch." They stood in the doorway for a moment. The room behind Vance was quiet. Maya had stopped talking when the door opened, and Nolan was standing with his arms crossed and his eyes on Ava with the particular attention of a man who has learned that Ava's face carries information if you know how to read it. He read it now. "How much bigger?" he said. Ava looked at him, then at Maya, then back at Vance. "Big enough," Vance said, "that we're going to need to move Maya out of this hospital before 2 o'clock. Nolan was the first to respond. He uncrossed his arms and straightened to his full height and said with the controlled quiet of a man who has learned that volume is not the same as force, "She just had chelation therapy. You want to move her now?" "I want her alive," Vance said, "which requires her being somewhere that Garrett's network cannot reach with a state court order and 2 men in suits before 2 o'clock. She looked at Maya directly. "Medically, can she be moved?" Maya didn't answer. She looked at Ava. Ava was already running it. Vitals from the last, check the chelation timeline, the current serum levels that Torres had updated 40 minutes ago, the specific risk calculus of a body that had been poisoned and treated, and was trending in the right direction, but had not yet fully stabilized. She ran it the way she ran everything fast, complete without the performance of deliberation. "With monitoring equipment and a medical escort," she said. "Yes." "Then we move," Vance said. Hale appeared in the doorway behind Vance. He had his administrator's phone in one hand and his own phone in the other, and his expression said he had been making calls while the rest of them were in this room, and the calls had produced information that had shifted his read of the situation. The sheriff's department received a formal request to execute the injunction at this address, he said. My legal counsel just confirmed it. They have a deputy on the way. How long? Ava said. 40 minutes, maybe less. Vance said, we need 30. Then let's not use 30 talking about it, Ava said and turned to Maya. Maya was already pushing herself to sit at the edge of the bed. She moved with the careful deliberateness of a woman whose body was not fully cooperating, but whose mind had made a decision and was not negotiating with her body about it. She looked at her bandaged arms at the IV line that Torres had running into her left hand at the monitor, lead still attached to her chest, and she looked at all of it with an expression that said she understood exactly what getting up right now was going to cost her and had decided to pay it. Tell me what to do, she said to Ava. Stay still for 60 seconds, Ava said. Let me disconnect you properly so you don't spend the next hour bleeding. She moved fast. She had the monitor leads off in 20 seconds, the IV line capped and taped in another 30. The portable pulse oximeter switched to Maya's finger instead of the wired unit in another 15. She worked with the economy of motion that comes from having done precise things under pressure so many times that the motion lives in the hands rather than in the mind. Nolan was beside his sister the moment Ava stepped back. He didn't lift her, he offered his arm, and Maya took it, and they stood together, and the image of it, this enormous man and his small bandaged sister, standing side by side with the particular solidarity of people who have come through something terrible together, was the kind of thing that stayed with a person. Hale said from the door, "Where are you taking her?" Vance said, "Federal safe location. I can't specify it here." "I need to know she's under medical supervision," Hale said. His voice was firm, not obstructive firm in the way of a man whose professional responsibility had a clear edge, and he was standing at it. "She was poisoned 6 hours ago. She is still in active treatment." "She'll have it," Vance said. "I want Lane with her," Hale said. The room was briefly very quiet. Ava looked at him. He met her eyes. "You're the treating nurse," he said. "The continuity of care belongs with you." And frankly, he paused, and something in his face that was usually armored was briefly not, "She trusts you, and I trust you. And right now, those are the only two facts about the situation that I am completely certain about." Vance looked at Ava. "Are you willing?" "Yes," Ava said. She had already decided before the question was finished. They moved in the next 4 minutes. Torres appeared with a go-bag of medications, chelation continuation supplies, monitoring equipment, emergency protocols written out in his clean, precise handwriting, and handed it to Ava without being asked because he had anticipated the need and prepared for it while everyone else was in the room having the conversation. She took it and looked at him, and he gave her a small nod that said everything that was worth saying between two people who had just operated on the same side of something that mattered. Sandra held the quarter. She stood at the intersection of the east hallway and the main floor with the authority of a woman who had decided that the title of charge nurse meant something and was going to make it mean something right now, and she directed traffic and answered questions and kept two curious residents from following the movement down the hall with a single look that required no supplementary words. Hale walked them to the service exit. He kept his phone to his ear for the last part of the walk, updating his legal counsel, running interference on the administrative side, building the paper wall that would slow down whatever arrived at the front entrance and buy the 60 seconds they might still need. At the service exit, he stopped. Vance went ahead with Maya and Nolan. Ava paused. Hale said, "When this is over, whenever that is, I want you back on my floor." Ava said, "You just spent a day trying to get me off your floor." "Yes," he said. "I was wrong. It happens occasionally." The dryness of it was deliberate, and underneath it was something genuine and unguarded that she recognized as the particular honesty of a man who doesn't apologize easily and is doing it anyway. "Come back," he said. "I'll think about it," she said. She went through the door. Vance's vehicle was a dark federal SUV unmarked parked at the service loading area, with a second agent behind the wheel who had the engine running before they cleared the steps. Ava got Maya settled across the back seat, checked her pulse and oxygen saturation before the door was fully closed, noted the numbers with satisfaction and a measured level of continued vigilance, and then sat beside her with the go-bag open across her knees as the vehicle pulled out. Nolan took the front passenger seat. He was too large for it, and he knew it, and he sat in it anyway in the compressed, careful way of a very big person in a small space who has made peace with the inconvenience because the alternative was worse. He didn't speak. He watched the side mirror. Maya said quietly to the roof of the vehicle, "I keep waiting to feel relieved." "Give it time," Ava said. "Do you?" Maya turned her head toward Ava. "Feel relieved when something is over." Ava thought about it honestly. "I feel the absence of pressure," she said, "which isn't the same as relief, but it's adjacent to it." "That's not very comforting," Maya said. "No," Ava agreed, "but it's accurate." Maya made that sound again, the one that was almost a laugh. It was stronger this time, more itself. Vance from the front said, 47 minutes after we cleared the building, the sheriff's deputy arrived at St. Mercy's main entrance. She was reading from her phone, and Dr. Hale's legal counsel met him at the door. The injunction was presented. The hospital's response was that the patient had been discharged into federal protective custody and that any questions about her current whereabouts should be directed to the EPA's Criminal Investigations Division. She paused. The deputy apparently had a very interesting conversation about jurisdictional authority with Dr. Hale personally, which, based on the report I'm getting, Dr. Hale appeared to enjoy more than was strictly professional. Nolan made a sound from the front seat. It was a laugh, a real one, short, involuntary, the kind that breaks out of a person before they've decided to allow it. He pressed his hand over his mouth and looked out the window, and the back of his shoulders shook slightly. Maya looked at Ava with eyes that were bright in a new way. The safe house was 40 minutes outside the city, a federal facility that looked like nothing from the outside and was inside, clean and functional, and staffed with a medical professional who had Ava's go-bag inventory checked and confirmed within 10 minutes of their arrival. Vance established the perimeter protocols, checked in with her division, and then came to find Ava in the room where Maya was settled and resting. "The documentation is formally entered into federal evidence," Vance said. "The drive has been received and logged. Chain of custody is established from the point of Maya's initial photographing through your transmission to me through the formal evidence log. It is clean and it is unbreakable." Ava said, "And the names above Garrett?" Vance's expression shifted into something that was not quite satisfaction, but was in the same family. "We've been building a file on a network of EPA contractors and regional compliance officers for 2 years," she said. "Missing links. Every time we got close, something went sideways. The evidence chain would develop a gap, or a witness would suddenly become unavailable, or a filing would disappear." She paused. "Maya's documentation fills 4 of those gaps. The signatures on those falsified filings connect Garrett to 2 regional EPA compliance officers, 1 federal contractor, and a division supervisor who has been on our radar since 2021. She looked at Ava directly. "We're not just prosecuting Garrett. We're taking down the entire oversight failure that allowed him to operate. Multiple facilities, multiple states, years of falsified environmental reports, millions of dollars in avoided cleanup costs, communities living next to toxic disposal sites that were signed off as clean." The weight of it landed in the room. "How many facilities?" Ava said. 14, Vance said, "that we know of so far." Ava absorbed this. She thought about Robert Fisk, the maintenance worker whose career was destroyed. Dr. Anita Borg, the chemist, who moved to Portland carrying a dropped charge that never fully disappeared. She thought about however many others there were, whose names she didn't have yet, who had tried to do the right thing and had been ground down by a machine that was significantly larger and better resourced than any of them had understood when they stepped forward. "The previous victims," Ava said, "Fisk and Borg, will they be contacted?" "They'll be key witnesses," Vance said. "This case is going to go wide lane, very wide. The arrests will start in the next 72 hours. She paused. "Starting with Garrett." Something settled in the room. Not celebration, it was too serious for celebration, too heavy, with the full understanding of what had almost not happened, but something that had its own kind of weight. The weight of things that are right being made right. Ava went to check on Maya. Maya was not asleep, though her eyes had been closed when Ava came to the door. She opened them at the sound of Ava's step and looked at her with the particular alertness of a person whose body is resting and whose mind is not. "Nolan is finally asleep," Maya said. "In the chair outside. First time he's stopped moving since this morning." "Good," Ava said. She checked Maya's pulse. Still strong, the color in her face had continued to improve through the drive. The chelation was holding. She would need the next 2 doses on a schedule, and then a full blood panel in the morning, and Ava had already communicated this to the facility medic with the specificity of someone who was not going to allow a handoff to become a gap. Vance told you, Maya said, about how big it is. Yes. Maya was quiet for a moment. I didn't know, she said. When I photographed those records, I thought I was documenting one bad facility director doing one corrupt thing. I had no idea it was connected to anything larger. She paused. Does that change anything? That I didn't understand what I was holding? No, Ava said. You saw something wrong. You documented it. You tried to report it. That's the whole thing. The rest of it was always there. You just happened to be the one who pulled the thread that it was attached to. Maya looked at the ceiling. Robert Fisk, she said. He tried in 2019, 3 years before me. If they had listened to him, they didn't, Ava said. You can't carry that. You can only carry what you did. I almost didn't survive what I did, Maya said. Almost, Ava said. Didn't. The simplicity of it landed the way simple, true things land directly without interference. Maya turned her head to look at Ava. I want to ask you something, as she said, and I want you to actually answer it. Ask, Ava said. Why did you leave? Maya said. The SEALs? The military? Whatever it was specifically, why did you stop? Ava was quiet for a moment. It was not a question she was asked often because very few people knew enough about her to know there was a question to ask. She considered giving Maya the short version, the diplomatic version, the version that was true but not complete. Then she looked at this woman, 24 years old, who had spent 3 years quietly gathering evidence against people who had every institutional advantage and who had still been standing at the end of it, even when they tried to make sure she wouldn't be, and she decided Maya Driscoll had earned the complete version. I was good at the mission, she said, very good. And for a long time, that was enough, being good at something that mattered. But there came a point where the mission started to feel like they were solving problems in a loop. Same problems, different geography. And the people I was helping in the moment, I never knew what happened to them after. She paused. I needed to know what happened after. Maya was watching her with complete attention. There was a woman, Ava said, in a situation I can't describe specifically. She was injured not in combat in the way that civilians get injured when combat is happening near them. I stabilized her in the field. I did everything I could with what I had, and then I had to leave because the mission required it. She was looking at the middle distance, not at Maya, and her voice was completely level in the way that voices get completely level when they are carrying something that has been carried for a long time and has found its resting place. I never found out if she survived. I asked. Nobody could tell me, or nobody would. She paused. That was the last one. After that, I went to nursing school. Maya said nothing for a moment. Then did she? I don't know, Ava said. I've accepted that I'm not going to know. But you're here, Maya said, so that you know for the next one. Yes, Ava said. Maya held her gaze for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, then I'm glad you didn't know, because not knowing brought you here. And here is where I needed you. The room was very still. Ava said nothing. There was nothing to say that the silence didn't already contain. The next morning arrived the way mornings arrive after long nights, not gently but with the particular clarity that comes from having been awake for most of the dark and finally arriving at light. Ava had slept 3 hours on a cot in the room adjacent to Maya's, which was 3 hours more than she had expected, and enough to function on, which was all she had ever required. At 6:47 in the morning, Cora Vance knocked on her door and said, Garrett was arrested 40 minutes ago. Ava sat up. And the others? 2 EPA regional officers taken simultaneously. The federal contractor surrendered voluntarily at 5:30, which his lawyer apparently advised after seeing the evidence package. Vance's voice had the particular quality of someone who has been awake all night for a reason and has arrived at the reason. The division supervisor is in custody. We're issuing warrants for 3 additional corporate officers at Meridian's parent company by end of day. She paused. The judge who signed the injunction is under investigation. Ava stood up. She pressed her feet to the floor and breathed for a moment and let the information settle through her fully. Maya, she said. Still asleep, Vance said. Her numbers are stable. The medic ran a 4 a.m. check and everything is where you said it should be. She needs the 7 a.m. chelation dose, Ava said. Already prepared, Vance said. Ava nodded. She went to the window. Outside, whatever was outside was morning, and it was real, and it existed in the world that Maya Driscoll was still in because of a sequence of events that had started with a 7-foot man bursting through an emergency room door and a quiet blonde nurse who had not moved out of the way. She heard Nolan's voice in the corridor, low, asking something, and Vance's response brief and confirming. Then a sound that she had not heard from him in all of the hours since the beginning of this, a sound that was uncomplicated. Not controlled, not managed, just real. He had heard about Garrett. She went out into the corridor. Nolan was standing with his back to the wall and his head tipped back against it, and his eyes were closed, and his face, this enormous, scarred, tattooed face that had terrified an entire emergency room less than 24 hours ago, was doing something she had not seen it do before. It was simply resting, the effort of holding everything together. The effort that had been running continuously since the phone rang yesterday morning, and his life had exploded into crisis, had been released, and what was underneath it was the face of a man who was 32 years old and loved his sister and had been very, very scared for a very long time and was now finally something other than scared. He heard Ava's step and opened his eyes. They looked at each other. "They got him," he said. "They got him," she said. He looked at the ceiling again. Exhaled. "All of it," he said. "The whole network." "All of it," she said. He brought his head forward. He looked at his hands, those enormous scarred hands that had been so dangerous and so gentle in turns across the last 24 hours, and he looked at them for a long moment. "I was going to go after him," he said. "Last night, before everything started moving, I had a plan. I knew where the facility was. I was going to—" He stopped. He looked at Ava. "You know what I was going to do." "Yes," she said. "You stopped me," he said. "Not by telling me not to, by making it so there was something else to do instead." He held her gaze. "That's a skill. Redirection is usually more effective than prohibition," she said. He made the sound that was his version of a laugh. Then he said, "What happens now to Maya?" "She finishes her treatment protocol," Ava said. 3 more days on the chelation, then a complete blood panel, then outpatient monitoring for the next 6 weeks. She paused. "She's going to be okay, Nolan, fully okay. Her body is resilient, and we caught it in time." "Both of those things are true." He nodded. He was looking at her with something in his expression that had layers to it, gratitude, and something more complicated than gratitude. The complicated thing that people feel when they have been in a crisis with someone and have discovered in the extremity of it exactly what kind of person that someone is. "You're going back," he said, "to the hospital. When Maya is stable enough to transfer to Vance's care," she said. "Yes." "To be a nurse," he said. "To be a nurse," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. "Does Hale know what he has?" "He's starting to figure it out," she said. "Good," Nolan said. "Simple. Final. The word of a man who says what he means and means what he says and does not add to it when the adding isn't necessary." Maya's door opened. She appeared in the doorway in the slow, careful way of someone who has been horizontal for hours and is testing the relationship between their body and vertical for the first time, and she looked at her brother, and he looked at her, and neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Maya said, "I heard Vance telling the medic." "Yeah," Nolan said. "Garrett is actually in custody," she said. It came out like she was checking whether the words were real, whether they fit in her mouth the way real things fit. "He is," Nolan said. Maya pressed her hand flat against the doorframe. Her eyes were bright. Her jaw was tight. She was holding herself together with a precision that Ava recognized, the precision of someone who has decided where and when they are going to let themselves feel it, and the where and when was not here in front of federal agents and medical personnel, but later privately with her brother, where the feeling could be what it needed to be without performance and without an audience. But there was one thing that came through anyway, one thing she couldn't keep back, and she didn't try to. She looked at Ava. "Thank you," she said. It was not the reflexive thank you of courtesy. It was the kind that carries the full weight of the thing. It's acknowledging the weight of a life and the weight of everything that comes after a life is preserved, which is so much more than the single moment of preservation. Ava looked at her. Then she said something she had said to two other people in the last 24 hours in response to the same two words, and she meant it each time she said it. Don't thank me yet. Maya shook her head slightly. Why do you keep saying that? Because it's not finished, Ava said. Garrett is in custody. The network is being dismantled. But there are 14 facilities. There are communities living near toxic sites that were signed off as clean. There are people in those communities who don't know yet what was done to them. There's Robert Fisk, who lost his career. There's Anita Borge, who carried a drop charge for 3 years. She paused. The arrest is the beginning. The justice is a longer project. Maya held her gaze, and then something in her face changed as settled into something new. Something that had not been there at the beginning of this, or maybe had been there all along, but had not had room to show itself through the fear and the pain and the urgency. It was the expression of a person who has come through something terrible and has arrived at the other side of it, not diminished, but altered, not smaller, but differently shaped, forged into something that knows its own strength in a way it could not have known before the pressure was applied. Then help me make sure it finishes right, Maya said. Ava looked at her for a long moment. That, she said, I can do. 3 weeks later, Ava Lane walked back through the doors of St. Mercy Hospital's trauma floor at the start of the day shift. She had her badge, her lanyard, and her clipboard. She moved through the floor the way she always moved, quietly, steadily, with the particular composure that people had been misreading as hesitance since the day she arrived. Torres was at the nursing station. He looked up when he saw her and said without preamble, Bay 3 has a presentation that's been bothering me since 6 a.m. I want your read on it. In a minute, she said. Sandra looked up from behind the counter. She looked at Ava for a moment, the full honest look of a woman who has revised her estimate of something significantly and is not embarrassed about the revision. She gave her a nod, one nod, compact and sincere. Ava nodded back. Hale appeared from the direction of his office. He stopped when he saw her. He stood in the corridor for a moment looking at her with the expression of a man who has spent 3 weeks running a department and has noticed every single day the specific shape of what was missing from it. Then he said, Bay 3. Torres mentioned it, she said. Good, he said. And then with the directness of a man who has decided that the thing worth saying is worth saying plainly, welcome back. Ava Lane looked at the floor of the emergency department that she had walked into 6 days ago, as a rookie, as a nobody, as the quiet blonde nurse that nobody had seen coming. She looked at the faces of the people who worked inside it, people who now knew something true about her. Not all of it, not the classified parts, in the years, in the weight of 11, but enough to know that the stillness was not absence, that the quiet was not weakness, that the most capable person in the room is not always the loudest one, and the most dangerous hands are not always the ones that look like they should be. She walked to Bay 3, opened the chart, and went to work. Ava Lane was never just a rookie nurse. She was exactly what this place needed, exactly when it needed her, and she had known it from the moment she walked through the door.